Alright, I am back again with a follow-up tutorial regarding the portraits for the M.U.G.E.N screen pack created by NOZ or NOZ. I'm not going to go into detail as to how to create the actual portraits. This is a small tutorial on how to change the attire of a character perhaps, or perhaps the eyes, maybe the hair. There is a M.U.G.E.N character out there called Hiel, which is actually a clone of Kula Diamond, popular character from the King of Fighters series. And in this tutorial I'm going to show you guys how to create a portrait based off of one of the official artworks of Kula Diamond. So let's get started. First of all, I'm going to open the reference picture that I have. Here we can see an artwork created by Emma KOF, and we can see here that the outfit of Kula is very, very dark, close to blackish, but there's a white hue in there. Her gloves are white, whereas Kula's are yellow, and her hair is green instead of blue. Now, if we look at this official artwork, we see that, as I mentioned earlier, this suit is not a dark blue color. Kula's hair is blue instead of green, red eyes. Kula's hair is long, whereas Hiel's hair is actually short. So there's a lot of detail that needs to be changed, and people wondered, how do you go about that? Is there an easy, simple way to do this? Nothing is really ever simple, but at least this will give you an idea how to go about doing this. In the earlier video I did regarding the portraits, I showed you a particular way to extract the background from the character in question. That is one selection method, you could say, because you end up with something that can be selected. I'm going to show you another selection tool, which is called the Quick Selection tool, hidden under the W key on your keyboard. You see here that the tool has been selected, and if the magic wand tool is selected, right click on this icon and select the Quick Selection tool. Just like with the normal brush, using the brackets you can increase the size or make it smaller. I'm going to start with the hair portion. Now, what the Quick Selection tool does is that it literally lets you decide what portions of the artwork to select. Now, you can see here that I've got part of the face selected as well, and already parts of her uniform. I don't want that. So if there are portions selected which you do not want selected, you press and hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, which turns the plus you see at the center of the circle into a minus. If I let go of the Alt key, it turns into a plus, and if I press and hold down Alt again, it turns into a minus, which means I will subtract from the current selection. And if I simply select all that and then reselect portions of her hair, as well as here, I suppose. Well, actually, I will leave that out of the equation for now. I do want this part, however, and I want part of her head not to be part of this selection, and a little bit more there. Alright, now here you can see we've got a pretty decent rough selection. What I'm going to do now is zoom in a little closer, which you can do with Control or Command plus on your keyboard. I'm going to press Q on my keyboard, which enters the quick mask mode, and you can see that suddenly the character has been has gotten a red overlay. This means that all the red that you see will not be part of your selection. And now, using the brush tool, pressing B on your keyboard, If you use a purely black color and you start painting, this means that you subtract more detail from the selection. And if I press X on my keyboard, which then turns to a white color, I can actually add to my selection. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make this brush a little smaller, and I'm going to just trace the parts of her hair that I, of course, want to be part of this selection. If you have a graphics tablet, that will help tremendously. I don't have it hooked up currently, so I'm doing this with my mouse. Just like so. Like so. Right, I'm going through a little time lapse here to save time in this video. There. Just a little bit of fine-tuning right here. And I think that leaves me with a pretty decent selection. Now if I press the Q key on my keyboard again, this reverts back to my normal view, and you can see that all the little details have been added and or subtracted from my selection. Now I want you can clearly see that there are just some few specks here which I missed, so I'm going to be adding them, actually subtracting those from my selection, like so, like so. And well, that will do. Now, this is a pretty decent selection of the hair, and what we will be doing now is you press Control U or Command U on your keyboard, which will bring up the hue saturation panel. Now you see there is master highlighted here. What you want to do is you click this layer and you instead select blues. What this does is that it only affects blue hues in this in your particular selection or your entire image if you do not have a selection. And from here you're gonna slide the hue slide dial up or down, something like that, and then you click on this again and you select the cyans, because cyans and blues are two different colors, and with this you can further adjust the color that you want. And I think I'll go back to the blues a little bit and just make it a little more to the greenish side, something like so. I think this is a pretty decent selection. If I look over here, it's fairly accurate. So I press Control D or Command D if you're on a Mac, which will deselect my selection, and you can see that we've changed the hair from a blue highlight, which you can see here, to a more greenish hue, a more turquoise, if you will. Right, next what I'm going to do is the hair portion that you see down here is, I don't need that because, you know, as we see here, Hiel has short hair, so we actually want to remove a portion of her hair. Now, there are several ways you can go about this. You can again select this quick selection tool and simply trace around her body and select and add and subtract the portions that need to be selected. Others might find that the pen tool is more suited for this. If you simply trace around the contours of her body, you can select the hair that way. It doesn't really matter which way you pick, as long as you reach the result you so desire. Right, so if I simply press delete now, you can see that a portion of her underarm gets deleted as well. Well, not per se deleted, but blurred, and it's kind of obvious. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo this deletion, and instead I'm going to select, modify, and I'm going to contract, and I'm going to contract this selection by 1 pixel. Now, in my previous videos, I referred to inversing this selection. I'm not going to do this time. I'm simply going to hit delete right now, which leaves me with a little more space between the deleting of the undesired portion of this character and the portions that I do want. But it gives me, it makes sure that the very outer edge doesn't get blurred as much as opposed to when I do not use the contract option. So instead I'm simply going to use the eraser tool and set its hardness all the way to 100%. Right click on your canvas and drag the slider all the way from 0 if it's there, or somewhere around here, all the way to 100% to make sure that you've got a very hard eraser, and simply delete all the excess lines that are there. This can be a bit of a tedious process, but if you want something done properly, it tends to take a bit of effort. That's usually how it goes. Like that, and make it a bit smaller again, and just try and trace along this little blue line that covers the outer edge, and here as well. Something like so. Now if you zoom out, you hardly notice it really. So right now I've got one portion of her hair removed. Now I want to remove a portion of her hair right over here. I'm going to undo that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the pen tool this time. I'm going to press P on my keyboard. And the pen tool is a bit of an advanced tool, so if you can't get it right the first time, don't be discouraged, because it does take a bit of practice. Let's see, my reference photo says roughly shoulder length, maybe a tad shorter. So I'm going to click here once to make an anchor point. And under the options over here, I believe you can check rubber banding, which actually shows what your curve is going to do. And I'm going to click here on the edge of her shoulder. I'm going to click and drag my selection down so I can actually create a curved line. Let's say like so. I'm going back to this anchor point, this little square. I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard and I'm going to click on it. And from here, I'm going to simply try and trace along the contours of her shoulder and back in an attempt to make a proper selection. As I said before, especially the pen tool takes a bit of patience and some trial and error, but once you do get the hang of it, it is a very, very powerful tool to have at your disposal. Something like so. Now, since these portraits usually will be viewed at a bit of a distance, I mean, I'm zoomed in at 300% right now, so if I zoom all the way out, you won't see some minor mistakes, so don't be too worried about those as long as you get a decent selection. That is a bit too extreme. As long as you get a decent selection, you should be in the clear. And from here you connect to the initial anchor point that we made, and that will close the path that we created. Now if you right click anywhere really, you say we're going to make a selection, anti-alias, yeah sure, make sure the feather radius is set to 0 and click OK. And this turns the path we just made into a selection. And I'm going to press delete and use a normal brush, a normal eraser, to get rid of the fine lines that were left behind, like so. And so. Now, as you see here, her hair was overlapping her arm, which is actually part of the selection that we want to keep. This is a bit of a tricky thing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to try it right now. I'm going to go to my spot healing brush, which you can access via the J key on your keyboard. And I'm simply going to paint over it and see what Photoshop does with it. Sometimes you can reach a pretty decent effect, and sometimes it looks absolutely shite. Perhaps make it a little smaller. No, that's not helping. Right. Up close it looks like a bit of a mess, but if you zoom out, you won't really notice it at first glance. Now I'm going to try and tidy it up just a little bit. I'm going to remove a part of the selection here, and I'm actually going to my smudge tool right here, and I'm going to try and blend this a bit in hopes to lessen the damage that I've done. Something like so. Something like this. It's not perfect, but for something like this it will do the job just fine. Now, one thing that I do want to do is I'm going to make a layer below this active layer. So I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard and left click on the layer icon, which creates a new layer below this layer. I'm going to press and hold down I and select just the very outline of her hair here, which will give me that exact color with this color picker. I'm going to go to my brush by pressing B on my keyboard, right click and making sure that I've got a hardness of 100%. And from here I'm simply going to trace along this line in order to give it that sort of outline that the rest of her hair has as well, so it looks a bit less out of place. Like so. Again, you could use the pen tool for this if you want to, but yeah, I find this works just fine. Now, in just a short period of time, we've removed a large portion of her hair as well as changed the color of it. Right now I'm going to adjust the color of her uniform, which should be a very dark toned blue instead of this sort of crimson, magenta, reddish hue that it has. So I'm going to select this layer. I'm going to press Control and then press E, which merges this layer with the layer that sits below it. So the new line that we added to the hair just now is now actually part of our selection layer, sorry. And I'm going back to my quick selection tool, and this time I'm going to select her outfit. Alright, with this we have a fairly decent selection of her attire. Now I'm going to switch to my other character. Yep, it shows here that the zippers on her uniform are actually a silver-ish kind of color, whereas Kula's zippers are definitely more gold-ish. So I'm going to try and remove these zippers from the selection and really selecting and reselecting and adding and subtracting is simply a part of this admittedly tedious process you have to endure, really. There. I think that is a pretty decent selection of our outfit. Alright, now same as with the hair, we are going to press Control U or Command U on the keyboard, which opens up the hue and saturation panel, and from the drop-down list over here I'm going to select reds. This means that only the red values in the selection are affected and all other colors are left unaffected. I will drag the hue slider all the way to the left until I find a shade of blue that fits her outfit. I think something like this will do. And then I grab the saturation slider and slide it to the far left as well, because saturation determines the vibrance in colors, and since there isn't a whole lot of vibrance in Hiel's outfit at all, we will have to reduce the saturation, and I think something like this is fine. Now then we select the magentas, and I'm simply going to slide the saturation slider all the way to the left, as I feel that the magentas can be left out of Hiel's outfit. Now I might just add a slight amount of saturation, something like this. Yeah. And if I deselect my selection, we can see that this is already starting to look quite a bit like Hiel's outfit. Right, there are two things left to do now. The zippers and her gloves are actually a silver whitish sort of color, and her eyes are a shade of blue. And I'm going to start with the eyes. So I'm once again grabbing my quick selection tool, and I'm going to create a selection around the eyes. Like so. And I'm once again going to press Control U, which opens the hue and saturation panel, and once again I'm going to select the reds, and I will once again slide the hue slider to the left until I find a shade of blue a sort of turquoise-ish blue that I'm happy with. Something like this. Now, as you can see, a portion of her eyes is unaffected because those values fall outside of the reds values which have been selected. So what we are going to do is we are going to click magentas, and this time we're going to slide the hue slider to the left until we find a shade of blue that matches what we did just now. Perhaps a slightly darker shade to make it look as though a bit of a shadow is cast over her eyes, like so. And that looks fine. You select that, and in a matter of seconds we changed the color of her eyes from a crimson red to a coolish blue. Okay, so lastly, to save time on this tutorial, I have already got a layer here which selects all the portions of her zippers, gloves, and buckle, you name it, because these need to be turned white-ish. So I've got my selection here. I actually made this layer before and just filled it with the black, but made it invisible so I can always just have my selection at hand. And once you've selected all the portions that need to be selected, you will once again press Ctrl U or Command U, and with that layer selected, this time I will simply stick to the master selection here, because a white value is actually something that falls outside of the color spectrum. So all I need to do is drag the saturation slider all the way to the left, which turns the color to a plain grayish look. And from here I press OK. And what we're going to do next is press Ctrl L on the keyboard, or Command L, which opens the levels panels, sorry. And what the levels panels does is it adjusts the shadows, midtones, and highlights of a particular selection or an entire image if you don't have a selection. So we're going to take this rightmost sort of triangle and drag it to the left, and immediately you can start to see it, sort of change in brightness. Something like this. Now if you take the other two arrows and slide them slightly to the right, we can bring just a little bit more variety in shades of gray, really. Something like this. And I think that will do just fine. One thing I am noticing now is that Hiel's belt is actually also a shade of white, so I will quickly try and select those. Something like that. Now I will quickly remove all the color from this belt, and maybe I can, no, that's not. I will once again simply go to the levels panel and make it brighter, but not too bright. Something like this. That will do nicely. Now, one thing that really does bother me, after all, is this sort of purple undergarment. I was hoping that it would match nicely with her uniform, but it's too off for my liking. So I'm quickly going to select this portion of her outfit. Like so. And I will once again hit Ctrl U, and I think I will actually select the magentas and reduce the color to a more turquoise-ish look. Let's see if the reds adds to that. Not a whole lot. In which case I think I will simply stick to the masters selection. So I'll put magentas back to 0, and reds, well, +1 won't matter much. I will select master, and I will simply drag this to the left, reduce the saturation just slightly, and for the heck of it, I'm going to make it just a little darker by adjusting the levels. So drag this to the right, this a bit to the right, maybe a slight highlight, like so. And that pretty much concludes the tutorial regarding changing color on particular portions of a character. I hope this helps you. I hope it's useful to you in any way. And if it doesn't work out immediately the first time, do not get discouraged, because it is something that might take a bit of practice. Regardless, I hope you make the best of it, and yeah, happy gaming.